Well, Happy New Year, everyone. It's officially 2025. And what better way to kick off a brand new year than by diving headfirst into, well, you guessed it, a prophecy?
That's right. We're going to unpack a pretty popular prophecy, actually. It was making the rounds online as we headed into this new year.
Exactly. It was shared on a YouTube channel called Last Days on New Year's Eve, and the title really says it all. This is what the Lord is showing me for 2025 and beyond. So get ready because we're going deep on this one.
Absolutely, we are. We've poured over the transcript, analyzed the language, and we're here to break it all down for you.
And it is packed with predictions about everything from global events to spiritual shifts. It's quite a lot to cover, and whether you're a seasoned prophecy follower or just curious, well, we think you'll find this one intriguing.
What I found particularly interesting right off the bat was how this prophecy seems to address different groups of people with very distinct messages.
Yes, that was something that jumped out at me too. It's almost like there are these two parallel tracks running through the entire prophecy. One aimed at those who are, as it puts it, awake, and the other directed at those considered lukewarm.
And that's a really important point to understand right from the start, because this concept of being awake or lukewarm shapes the entire narrative of the prophecy. It's almost like setting the stage for two different potential futures.
Exactly. So let's start with those who are awake. What kind of future does this prophecy lay out for them?
Well, the prophecy speaks about this huge, mighty anointing that's coming upon the awake. It talks about them becoming harvesters, which suggests a very active role in some kind of spiritual outreach or growth, a real sense of purpose and mission.
Okay, interesting. So it's not just about them being spiritually alert, but also actively participating in something bigger.
Yes, and there's also this really fascinating prediction about a transfer of wealth from the sinner laid up for the righteous.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, isn't it? And it makes you think about how this idea of wealth transfer has popped up throughout history in different contexts, especially during periods of social unrest or when there's a sense of injustice that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, definitely. It makes you wonder how this prophecy envisions this transfer actually happening.
And it gets even more specific. The prophecy talks about this window, this specific period of time when there will be this great acceleration of prosperity for the awake. And this prosperity, it's not just about like winning the lottery or anything like that. It's about being prepared for the events that are coming.
Okay, so it's like being equipped for whatever challenges lie ahead.
Exactly. And the prophecy actually compares it to the story of Joseph in the Bible, how he prepared for the famine. It emphasizes the importance of listening to divine guidance during this time so the awake know how to use this prosperity wisely. It's not just about receiving, but about discerning the purpose behind it.
So it's not a free-for-all, grab what you can kind of prosperity. It's about responsibility and really understanding the role that this wealth is supposed to play in the bigger picture.
Right. And the imagery the prophecy uses is really striking, too. It talks about gifts being brought to the bride before the bridegroom returns. Now, in many religious traditions, the bride symbolizes the church, and the bridegroom is often interpreted as Jesus.
Okay, so we're talking about an outpouring of blessings on the church in preparation for the second coming of Christ.
Exactly. And the prophecy even connects it back to Jewish tradition, where the groom traditionally gives gifts before the wedding feast. It paints a picture of this huge celebration, this time of uniting for both the bride and the groom.
Wow, that's pretty powerful imagery. But it's not all sunshine and roses, is it? Because there's also this other group, the lukewarm, and the prophecy has a very different message for them.
Yeah, the message for the lukewarm is definitely more about, well, shaking things up. It talks about a time of great shaking that's coming to, like, wake them up from their spiritual apathy. It's not presented as punishment, but more like a jolt to get them paying attention to what's happening around them.
Right, kind of like a spiritual wake-up call, right?
Yeah, exactly. But even amidst this shaking, the prophecy reassures that God will take care of his beloved.
Yeah.
So there's this sense that even during difficult times, those who are truly God's will be protected.
So there's an element of hope even in that message, right? That even if things get rough, there's still this underlying promise of divine care.
Absolutely. But now let's shift gears a bit and move beyond these specific messages for different groups. Because this prophecy also gets into some pretty major global events and makes some really specific predictions.
And let's be honest, this is what most people are really curious about when it comes to prophecy, right? Those big global events that could shake things up on a worldwide scale.
Definitely. And this prophecy doesn't hold back. It predicts a huge increase in global conflict. In fact, it uses the word war 5 times in a row. It says, war, 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 war will be all over the news.
Wow, 5 times. That's definitely emphasizing something.
It is. And it doesn't stop there. It also talks about a great acceleration of war and rumors of war. So it's not just about isolated conflicts, but a more widespread escalation of tensions and violence.
Okay, so we're talking about a pretty bleak global outlook, and this prophecy even gets into specifics about a conflict between the US and China, right?
Yes, it specifically mentions a conflict over the Panama Canal, which is pretty significant. It uses the imagery of a red dragon flapping its wings over the canal.
And the red dragon, that's often interpreted as a symbol of communism, right? Especially in the book of Revelation.
Exactly. So we have this image of China, represented by the red dragon, asserting its dominance over a strategically important waterway.
And I think we all know who the prophecy points to as the key figure in this conflict.
You guessed it, Donald Trump. It says that he will tame the dragon with his whip.
Oh, the whip. That's a pretty strong metaphor.
It is. And the prophecy clarifies that it's not a literal whip, but more like a symbol of his influence, his ability to kind of put a halt to certain forces. It suggests he'll somehow subdue this communistic spirit, not just in China. The prophecy also mentions him taming Kim Jong-un of North Korea and the Chinese Communist Party as well.
So he's kind of like a global peacemaker in this scenario, right? At least temporarily.
That's how it's portrayed, yes. But the prophecy doesn't stop at international conflicts. It also delves into the American political landscape and talks about how this communistic agenda has been trying to influence the U.S. government.
Okay, and how does it describe this influence happening?
It talks about them working through hidden doors, kind of like operating behind the scenes, and it specifically mentions the Democratic Party as being involved. But it also says that this influence will be broken, at least for a while, thanks to, you guessed it, the cracking of the whip.
Okay, now we're getting into some pretty sensitive territory here. And I think it's important to remind everyone that we are not endorsing any political viewpoint here. We are simply analyzing the content of this prophecy and trying to understand its message.
Exactly. We are not taking sides here. We're just laying out what the prophecy says.
All right, so with that said, let's move north of the border and talk about what this prophecy has to say about Canada. What's the prediction for our neighbors to the north?
Well, it specifically mentions Justin Trudeau, and it says that his days as prime minister are numbered due to great corruption.
Okay, so that's pretty direct. Not exactly a rosy prediction for Mr. Trudeau.
No, it isn't. But there's also a more positive prediction for Canada. The prophecy speaks about a huge Holy Ghost revival that's going to sweep across the country from coast to coast.
That's a pretty common theme in prophecies, right? This idea of widespread spiritual awakening.
It is. But what's interesting here is that it ties this revival to a political shift in Canada. It talks about a dividing line emerging between the far left and the far right, and it says this will happen almost overnight.
So very sudden and dramatic political polarization.
Exactly. And it goes even further, saying that this demonic spirit that's supposedly been influencing Trudeau will be removed.
Okay, now we're getting into some spiritual warfare territory. So this demonic spirit is presented as a negative force that's been affecting Trudeau's leadership, and it's predicted to be cast out.
That's right. And this removal of the demonic spirit is then supposed to pave the way for this massive revival, which is predicted to lead to great things and Canada soaring as a nation.
So a pretty dramatic turnaround for Canada, both spiritually and politically. And this prophecy doesn't stop there, does it? It also has some things to say about Europe.
It does. It specifically mentions Emmanuel Macron of France, and it says that he will be dealt with for holding back the gospel and supporting a new world order that has a demonic influence.
Okay, so we see some similar themes here to the prediction about Trudeau. This idea of leaders being influenced by negative spiritual forces and then facing consequences for their actions.
Exactly. But just like with Canada, the prophecy also predicts a revival for Europe, specifically mentioning France. And it ties this revival back to Donald Trump and his metaphorical whip.
Okay, so how does Trump factor into the European revival?
The prophecy says that by cracking his whip, Trump will essentially put European leaders in check. And this will somehow create an environment where revival can break out.
So it's almost like he's clearing the way for spiritual awakening by confronting these leaders and their policies.
That's how it's presented, yes. And it's worth pointing out that the prophecy clarifies that this whip doesn't actually destroy the animal, meaning these nations or ideologies. It's more about temporarily taming them, creating a pause or a window of opportunity.
Right, like a brief respite from these negative forces, which allows revival and freedom to flourish. So it's not a permanent solution, but it creates space for positive change.
Exactly. Now, let's not forget about Russia. The prophecy also addresses the situation there.
Okay, so what does it have to say about Russia and Vladimir Putin?
Well, it uses the symbol of the bear to represent Russia, which is a pretty common symbol for the country. And it says that the bear will sit down for a while, again, thanks to the cracking of the whip.
So Putin and Russia will be subdued, at least temporarily, by Trump's actions. And like with the other predictions, this creates a window for revival to take place in Russia as well.
Precisely. So we're seeing this pattern of Trump's influence, symbolized by the whip, creating these temporary pauses in various parts of the world, which then open up opportunities for revival and spiritual growth.
Fascinating. Now, shifting our focus back to Asia, the prophecy also mentions Taiwan. What's the prediction there?
But a very positive one, actually. It talks about a rising sun over Taiwan, which is interpreted as a symbol of prayer and intercession. It's like saying that the prayers of God's people are going to have a huge impact on the nation.
Okay, so prayer is key here. And what's the outcome of all this prayer?
It's pretty spectacular. The prophecy talks about great gold, glory, and revival taking place in Taiwan. It sounds like a time of incredible spiritual outpouring and transformation.
Wow, that's quite a contrast to some of the darker predictions we've discussed. And it really highlights the importance of prayer throughout this prophecy.
Definitely. The prophecy emphasizes the need for prayer for Donald Trump as well, saying that he can't do this alone. It says that he needs the support of prayer to bring about this global revival.
Interesting. So it's not just about him wielding his whip, but also about people praying for him and supporting him spiritually.
Exactly. And it gets even more specific about this spiritual support. It says that a mantle will come upon him around January 20th, which is just a few weeks after this prophecy was given.
And a mantle in a spiritual context often symbolizes a transfer of authority or responsibility, right?
That's right. So it sounds like Trump is going to receive a new level of spiritual empowerment around that time, and this will lead to a major shifting in the world.
Okay, so some pretty big spiritual events are predicted to happen very soon after this prophecy was given. Now, let's talk about North Korea and Kim Jong-un. The prophecy doesn't mince words when it comes to this part of the world.
No, it doesn't. It actually uses a rather surprising term to refer to Kim Jong-un. It calls him the Pillsbury Doughboy, which is, well, quite a contrast to his image as a ruthless dictator.
It is, and I'm guessing that's not meant as a compliment.
Definitely not. The prophecy predicts that Kim Jong-un will be humbled, and his entire dynasty will collapse like dominoes. It even specifically mentions his sister being taken out as well.
Wow, those are some very direct and significant predictions. So what leads to this downfall of the Kim dynasty?
The prophecy describes a crumbling of the infrastructure in North Korea, which will lead to a period of great chaos. It sounds like a total collapse of the regime.
And what happens in the aftermath of this collapse?
Well, the prophecy sees this as an opportunity for the gospel to spread into North Korea. It talks about the iron curtain of communism being broken and missionaries from South Korea having a chance to minister there.
So even amidst this chaos and upheaval, there's a sense of hope, this potential for spiritual breakthrough in a place that has been closed off for so long.
Exactly. And it even describes a window of great salvation opening up in North Korea with angelic visitations and events of biblical scale taking place.
Wow, that's pretty incredible imagery. So even though things are predicted to get very dark, there's this ray of hope, this potential for a massive spiritual transformation.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to North Korea. The prophecy suggests that this wave of freedom and liberty could even spill over into China, potentially sparking a great wave of revival in that nation as well.
So a domino effect of spiritual awakening starting in North Korea and spreading to other parts of Asia. Pretty incredible. Now let's talk about the economic and societal shifts that this prophecy predicts. What kind of changes are we looking at?
Well, it talks about an acceleration of certain agendas, specifically mentioning those related to cryptocurrency and digital finance. So it seems like these trends that we're already seeing are going to ramp up significantly.
Okay, so a rapid shift towards a more digital and decentralized financial system. And what about the overall economic outlook?
The prophecy suggests that there could be two separate economic crashes or downturns on the horizon.
Okay.
It also talks about the plan for a one world order being slowed down and what it describes as darkness being lifted, at least for a season.
Interesting. So some pretty major economic and geopolitical upheavals are predicted, but there's also this sense that things will shift in a more positive direction for a while.
That's right. Now, there's also a specific warning about Donald Trump and his potential economic policies as they relate to Canada.
Oh, interesting. What's the warning?
It says that Trump might try to financially integrate Canada with the U.S., essentially erasing the financial borders between the two countries. It even mentions a potential new currency called AMO.
So no more Canadian dollar.
That's what it suggests. Although physical borders might remain in place.
Wow, that would be a huge change for both countries. And what about the long-term economic outlook for the U.S. itself?
The prophecy predicts a major economic downturn for the U.S., drawing parallels to the crashes of 1929 and 1930. It says that while America will eventually rebuild, it won't be the same as it was before. A great humbling is predicted for the nation.
Okay, so some tough times ahead for the U.S. economically. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about what this prophecy has to say about spiritual covenants.
Right. It specifically addresses the covenant established by the founding fathers of the United States.
And what does it say about that covenant?
Well, it says that this original covenant has been weakening over time due to compromise, but that Donald Trump's alliance with Israel has actually strengthened it, creating what it calls a three-stranded cord.
So Trump's support for Israel is seen as a key factor in revitalizing this spiritual covenant.
That's right. And the prophecy links this strengthening of the covenant to blessings in the Mediterranean region, things like increased wealth, natural resources, and agricultural abundance.
Okay, so a very tangible impact on the physical world as a result of this spiritual alignment. And what about the impact on Israel itself?
The prophecy predicts a significant revival in Israel, with a huge harvest of souls coming to know God. It even says that some rabbis will recognize Jesus as the Messiah, which is a pretty bold prediction.
It is. So we see this theme of spiritual awakening spreading to different parts of the world, including Israel.
Exactly. And the prophecy also talks about a spiritual dividing line being drawn, similar to the events at Mount Sinai, where people had to choose whether or not they would serve God. It suggests that this dividing line is being set up globally, and it's going to lead to a major shaking within the church in the coming years.
Okay, so a time of testing and separation is coming, but it's ultimately intended to bring about a massive harvest of souls. And it sounds like those who are awake are going to play a key role in this harvest.
Exactly. It talks about them being ready with their catcher mitts to receive all these new believers.
That's a pretty vivid image. So a lot of intense and challenging events are predicted, but ultimately it's leading towards this huge influx of people coming to know God.
That's right. Now, before we wrap up, the prophecy also touches on some potential threats that we should be aware of.
Okay, what kind of threats are we talking about?
It specifically mentions the possibility of terrorist attacks, starting in Europe and then spreading to North America, mentioning Toronto, Pennsylvania, and New York as potential targets.
Wow, that's pretty scary stuff.
It is, and it doesn't stop there. It also talks about a great shaking of the nation, with earthquakes, storms, and unusual signs appearing in the heavens. So some pretty major natural disasters are also predicted.
Okay, so definitely some challenging times ahead, both in terms of human actions and natural events. But despite all these warnings, the prophecy ends on a note of encouragement and empowerment for the listener, right?
Absolutely. It encourages you, the listener, to approach 2025 with a sense of anticipation and hope. It advises you to write down your hopes and prayers for the year, to find scriptures that support those hopes, and to believe big for positive outcomes.
Yeah.
It emphasizes thriving in 2025, experiencing accelerated progress, even in areas where you might feel doubt or discomfort.
So despite the potential for difficult times, the message is to stay hopeful and expectant, believing that God is working even in the midst of challenges.
Exactly. And the prophecy also includes a call to take communion with this hopeful perspective, believing in God's blessing and favor, complete healing, and freedom from any torment. There's even a declaration of reclaiming anything that was lost or stolen in 2024, with a promise of double restoration in 2025.
So a powerful message of restoration and abundance, even in the face of potential loss or hardship.
Exactly. And the prophecy really emphasizes the importance of walking in a state of favor and blessing, not just relying on luck or chance.
So it's about actively aligning ourselves with God's purposes and believing that He will work things out for our good, even in difficult circumstances.
That's right. And that's really the core message of this entire prophecy, isn't it? That despite the challenges and upheavals that might lie ahead, those who are aligned with God, those who are awake and actively seeking His guidance, will experience his protection, provision, and ultimately his victory.
Wow, that's been quite a journey. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, exploring this very detailed and far-reaching prophecy.
We have, and it's certainly given us all a lot to think about as we navigate the year ahead.
It has. Regardless of your personal beliefs about the nature and validity of prophecy, this vision offers a unique perspective through which to consider 2025 and the potential shifts we might observe on both a global and personal level.
Absolutely, and I think that's the real takeaway here. Whether you take these predictions literally or see them more as symbolic representations of potential trends, they challenge us to think critically about the world around us, about our own spiritual state, and about how we can actively participate in shaping a better future.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, a final thought for you, our listener. How might understanding these prophecies, even if you view them metaphorically or as potential trends rather than definitive predictions, influence your perspective on 2025 and the world around us? What does it truly mean to be awake during times that are perceived as significant and transformative? We sincerely hope this deep dive has provided you with a distinctive lens through which to consider the year ahead.
Well said. We appreciate you joining us for this deep dive, and we look forward to exploring more fascinating and thought-provoking topics with you in the future.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and as always, keep diving deep.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.